The Galactic University Xenobiology Laboratory buzzed with nervous energy as 17 different species clustered around their assigned workstations. Professor Zethrak, a tall Vortanian with 4 arms and crystalline skin, surveyed his mixed class with what could charitably be called concern. "Today," the professor announced, his translator converting his melodic tones into standard Galactic, "we will observe cellular regeneration in various species. Each student will demonstrate their race's natural healing capabilities using a minor incision." A collective shudder rippled through the classroom. The Quilarian student, Pip, turned a deeper shade of blue. "Professor, are you certain this is safe?" Professor Zethrak's 4 hands gestured reassuringly. "Perfectly routine. We'll make small cuts, observe the healing process under microscopes, and document the cellular response. Nothing dangerous." The human student, Jake Martinez, looked up from his datapad with a grin that made several nearby aliens take an involuntary step backward. "Sounds fun. How deep are we talking?" "Just surface level," Professor Zethrak replied, though something in the human's tone made his crystalline skin dim slightly. "Perhaps 2 millimeters at most." Jake shrugged. "Cool. Should we start?" The professor distributed sterile cutting implements, each designed for the specific physiology of different species. The ethereal student, Wisp, received what looked like a glowing feather. The rock-like Terran student, Boulder, got something resembling a diamond-tipped chisel. Jake received a standard medical scalpel. "Now then," Professor Zethrak continued, "who would like to volunteer first?" Silence stretched across the laboratory like a hell breath. Finally, Pip raised a tentative appendage. "I suppose I could—" "Actually," Jake interrupted, standing up, "I'll go first. Get things rolling." The classroom fell dead quiet. Even the Hive Mind Collective chorus stopped their constant mental chatter. Professor Zethrak blinked his primary and secondary eyes. "That's unexpectedly brave of you, human Jake. Very well. Please make a small incision on your forearm, and we'll observe." Jake rolled up his sleeve, revealing pale skin marked with various scars that made the alien students gasp. "You guys might want to move closer. Human healing is pretty interesting." "Those markings," whispered Echo, the sound-based resident student. "What are they?" "Oh, these old things?" Jake gestured casually at his scars. "Bike accident when I was 12. Surgery scar for my appendix. This one's from when I tried to pet a stray cat. The zigzag thing? Kitchen knife slipped while I was making dinner last week." The alien student stared in horror. Melody, the plant-based chlorophyte student, swayed as if she might faint. You collect injuries?" Jake laughed, a sound that made half the class flinch. "I don't collect them. They just happen. Life on Earth is kind of rough." Professor Zethrak cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should focus on the demonstration?" "Right." Jake picked up the scalpel and examined it with professional interest. "Nice and sharp. This should work perfectly." Without ceremony or hesitation, Jake drew the blade across his forearm. Not the gentle surface scratch the professor had envisioned, but a clean, confident cut that immediately began bleeding. The alien students screamed. Well, those that could scream did. Pip turned completely white and toppled over. Echo emitted a sound like a broken siren. Chorus began babbling in 17 different languages simultaneously. Melody's leaves turned brown and started dropping. "Fascinating," Jake said, hold his arm over a collection dish. "Look how quickly the platelets respond." Professor Zethrak rushed forward with medical supplies, his 4 hands shaking. "Human Jake, that's far deeper than intended." "Is it?" Jake looked genuinely confused. "Sorry, Professor. This is pretty shallow by human standards. Watch this." Before anyone could stop him, Jake pressed the edges of the wound together. The bleeding slowed immediately. "See? The clotting cascade is already initiating. Give it a few minutes, and you'll be able to watch the inflammatory response begin. The white blood cells will start flooding the area, and then the real fun begins." Harmony, the energy being student, flickered frantically. The real fun? What could possibly be fun about this barbarism? Jake's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, you guys are in for a treat. Human healing is like watching a war movie in fast forward. First, the neutrophils charge in like shock troops, eating everything in sight. Then the macrophages follow up like special forces, cleaning house and calling for reinforcements. The classroom was now in full panic mode. Half the students had either fainted or were in the process of fainting. The other half pressed themselves against the far wall as if Jake might explode. Within hours, Jake continued, oblivious of the chaos. Fibroblasts will start laying down new collagen matrix. It's like watching construction crews rebuild a damaged building, except everything happens in fast forward and involves way more violence. Professor Zethrak managed to find his voice. Violence? Well, yeah. Jake waved his bleeding arm enthusiastically. The inflammatory response is basically controlled destruction. Your immune system torches everything in the area just to be safe, then builds new tissue on top of the wreckage. It's incredibly efficient. Spark, the silicon-based mineral student, made a sound like grinding glass. You speak as if your body is constantly at war with itself. Jake paused thoughtfully. You know, that's not entirely wrong. Humans are basically walking battlefields. We got beneficial bacteria fighting harmful bacteria, immune cells constantly patrolling for threats, cancer cells trying to rebel, and various organs competing for resources. Dear ancestors, whispered Professor Zethrak, the digestive system alone is like a chemical warfare plant. Jake continued, warming to his topic. We dissolve food with acid so strong it could burn through metal, process toxins that would kill most species, and somehow extract nutrition from things that are actively trying to poison us. Flo, the liquid-based student, rippled with distress. Surely you exaggerate? Jake's grin widened. Wanting to tell you about alcohol? Humans literally consume a poison for fun. Our livers process it into even more toxic compounds, and we call it recreation. The remaining conscious students made various sounds of distress. Or coffee, Jake added helpfully. That's a plant neurotoxin that most species use as insecticide. Humans drink it every morning to wake up. Professor Zethrak sat down heavily in a chair that groaned under his weight. How are your species still alive? Natural selection, Jake said cheerfully, examining his cut. Oh, look, you can already see the clot formation beginning. The fibrin mesh is starting to trap red blood cells. Give it another minute, and we'll see the first signs of new tissue growth. New tissue? Echo managed to whisper. Yeah, humans regenerate constantly. We replace our entire skin every few weeks, regrow liver tissue in days if damaged, and can even regenerate some nerve connections. It's not as fast as some species, but we're basically self-repairing biological machines. Miss, the gaseous student, condensed into a tighter form as if trying to hide. Self-repairing? Sure. Watch this. Jake began gently cleaning the wound. The pain signals are already decreasing as endorphins kick in. Those are natural opioids. By the way, humans manufacture their own painkillers. Several students made choking sounds. The wound edges are already starting to pull together. Jake narrated like a sports commentator. Within 6 hours, you'll see new epithelial cells beginning to bridge the gap. By tomorrow morning, this will be sealed. Give it a week, and you'll barely be able to see where I cut myself. Professor Zethrak stared at the human with a mixture of horror and fascination. Your species routinely inflicts damage upon itself for educational purposes? Oh, this is nothing, Jake laughed. Wait until you hear about medical school. Human doctors practice surgery on each other. We literally cut each other open to learn how bodies work. The professor's crystalline skin went completely transparent. They practice? On living subjects. Living, volunteering subjects, Jake confirmed. Though mostly we use cadavers for the really invasive stuff. That's dead humans we preserve specifically for educational dissection. The sound that emerged from the classroom was like a choir of banshees having a breakdown. It gets better, Jake continued, apparently mistaking their horror for interest. Medical students compete to see who can make the most precise incisions. We have contests about who can cause the least tissue damage while achieving the desired effect. Professor Zethrak stood up slowly, all four hands trembling. I think I think perhaps we should postpone this lesson. Oh, really? Jake looked genuinely disappointed. We haven't even gotten to the good part yet. Wait until you see what happens when I describe how human surgeons train by operating on live patients, while other humans watch and critique their technique. The professor began backing toward the door. Class dismissed. Everyone dismissed. Please seek counseling if needed. Jake looked around at his unconscious and fleeing classmates with confusion. Did I say something wrong? Professor Zethrak paused at the door. Human Jake, in the interest of xenobiological education, might I ask you a personal question? Sure thing, Professor. What do humans consider genuinely dangerous? Jake thought for a moment, absently dabbing at his still-healing cut. Well, we tend to worry about things like black holes, gamma-ray bursts, or planet-killing asteroids. Why? The professor stared at him for a long moment, then quietly closed the door behind him. Jake shrugged and began packing up his materials. Outside in the hallway, he could hear what sounded like several species having simultaneous nervous breakdowns. Weird, he muttered. You'd think aliens would be more interested in comparative biology. As he cleaned his scalpel, Jake noticed his cut had already stopped bleeding entirely. The edges were pink and slightly swollen, showing the first signs of active healing. He smiled. Tomorrow's lesson on human immune responses was going to be epic. Word traveled fast through the Galactic University. By the next morning, Professor Zethrak's xenobiology classroom had acquired an audience that would have made a gladiatorial arena jealous. Students from 12 different departments crowded the hallways, whispering among themselves in dozens of languages. Jake Martinez walked to class completely oblivious to the sensation he'd caused. He carried his standard textbooks and a thermos of coffee that made nearby aliens give him a wide berth. Morning, Professor, he said cheerfully, settling into his seat. The original class members sat as far away as physically possible, some having apparently constructed makeshift barriers from lab equipment. Professor Zethrak looked like he hadn't slept. His crystalline skin flickered with nervous patterns. Good morning, human Jake. I trust you recovered from yesterday's demonstration. Jake held up his arm, showing a thin pink line where the previous day's cut had been. Completely healed. See? That's what I was talking about. Human regeneration is incredibly efficient. A collective gasp rose from the crowd packed outside the classroom windows. Yes, Professor Zethrak said weakly. About that, the Galactic Medical Council has requested a full report on human biology. Apparently, several species have lodged formal complaint about the traumatic nature of yesterday's lesson. Traumatic? Jake looked genuinely puzzled. It was just a basic demonstration of cellular repair mechanisms. Pip, the Quilarian student, raised a shaking appendage. Jake, you severed your own flesh with a blade while smiling. Then you describe your body as a battlefield where different systems wage constant war. Well, when you put it like that, it does sound a bit intense, Jake admitted. But that's just normal human physiology. Wait until you hear about today's topic. Professor Zethrak went very still. Today's topic? Jake pulled out his notes with obvious enthusiasm. Immune system responses to foreign pathogens. I brought some really interesting examples. The professor's translator seemed to malfunction briefly, producing only a strangled electronic sound. For instance, Jake continued, opening his thermos and releasing the aroma of coffee that made half the classroom evacuate, humans regularly consume substances that trigger controlled immune responses. This coffee contains compounds that most species classify as neurotoxins, but we develop tolerance through repeated exposure. Echo, the sound-based student, produce a noise like a broken instrument. You poison yourself daily? Not poison, Jay corrected, taking a large sip. Adaptive stress response. Humans excel at surviving hostile environments by gradually building resistance to harmful substances. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small container. I also brought lunch. Anyone want to see how humans process capsaicin? The container held what appeared to be bright red vegetables that seemed to glow with malevolent intent. Professor Zethrak backed against the wall. What are those? Ghost peppers, Jake said proudly. They're about 1 million Scoville units. Humans cultivate plants specifically to cause themselves pain, then eat them for enjoyment. Melody, the plant-based student, swayed in horror. You consume organisms that have evolved chemical defenses specifically to prevent consumption? Well, yeah, the burn means they're working. Jake bit into one of the peppers with obvious relish. What happened next would later be described in xenobiological textbooks as the Great Panic of Classroom 7. Jake's face immediately turned bright red. Tears streamed from his eyes. His nose began running profusely. He started sweating visible droplets. And he kept eating. "See," he said through obvious distress, "this is triggering massive histamine release, increasing blood flow to mucous membranes, and activating pain receptors throughout my digestive system." The alien student stared in absolute horror, as Jake appeared to be dying while narrating his own dissolution. The capsaicin molecules are binding to pain receptors, sending signals to my brain that I'm literally being burned alive. My body is responding with emergency cooling measures and increased mucus production to flush out the toxins. Professor Zethrak reached for the emergency medical kit. "Human Jake, we need to get you to the medical bay immediately." "What?" "No, this is great." Jake wiped his streaming eyes. "Feel my forehead. I'm running a low-grade fever as my immune system kicks into overdrive. This is exactly the kind of controlled stress response that makes humans so adaptable." "Controlled?" Spark, the mineral student, sounded like grinding stone. "You appear to be experiencing systemic poisoning." Jake laughed, which came out as more of a wheeze. "This is nothing compared to what humans do for entertainment. Ever heard of marathon running?" The silence that followed was deafening. Humans voluntarily run 26.2 miles, pushing their bodies to the edge of cardiovascular collapse. We literally run until our muscle fibers begin breaking down and our kidneys start failing. Then we celebrate and do it again next year. Wisp, the ethereal student, flickered weakly. "Why?" "For fun," Jake said simply, finishing his pepper. "Although the endorphin rush is incredible, that's our body's reward system for surviving extreme stress." Professor Zethrak slowly sat down. "Human Jake, yesterday you told us that your species practices surgery on itself for education. Today you've demonstrated that humans consume toxins and engage in self-destructive behaviors for recreation. I must ask, is there anything your species considers genuinely harmful?" Jake considered this seriously, while his face gradually returned to normal color. "Well, we generally avoid things that cause immediate death. Although humans do engage in extreme sports like base jumping, rock climbing without safety equipment, and deep-sea diving where equipment failure means certain death." "Why?" The question came from multiple students simultaneously. "Adrenaline," Jake explained. "Near-death experiences trigger massive hormone releases that create feelings of euphoria and heightened awareness. Humans become addicted to almost dying." The crowd outside the classroom had grown to include faculty members from multiple departments. Jake noticed the audience for the first time. "Oh, wow. Did word get out about the xenobiology demonstrations? Cool." He waved at the gathering crowd. "Want to see something really interesting?" Before anyone could object, Jake pulled out his datapad and called up a video file. "This is footage from something humans call contact sports. We've developed games where the objective is to physically dominate opponents through controlled violence." The video showed humans in protective gear running at each other at full speed and colliding with tremendous force. "Those impacts generate forces equivalent to small vehicle accidents," Jake narrated cheerfully. "Players regularly suffer concussions, broken bones, and torn ligaments. The most popular human sport involves repeated head trauma." Professor Zethrak made a sound like breaking crystal. "And this is entertainment? Billions of humans watch these games. We cheer when someone gets hit, particularly hard. The players who inflict the most damage become celebrities and earn vast sums of money." Harmony, the energy being, flickered frantically. "Your species celebrates violence?" "Controlled violence," Jay corrected. "We have rules. Usually." He switched to another video. "This is boxing. 2 humans take turns hitting each other in the face until one falls unconscious or gives up. The alien students watched in horrified fascination as two humans systematically beat each other bloody, while crowds cheered. The objective, Jake explained, is to cause enough brain trauma to render your opponent unconscious, but not enough to cause permanent damage. Although permanent damage does occur, and sometimes participants die, and humans volunteer for this. Boulder, the rock-like student, sounded like an avalanche of gravel. They fight for the privilege, Jake confirmed. The most skilled fighters earn millions of units and achieve legendary status. Humans literally worship those who are best at violence. Professor Zethrak stood up abruptly. I need to contact the Galactic Council immediately. Why? Jake asked innocently. Human Jake. The professor said carefully. Yesterday we learned that your species treats injury as routine. Today we've discovered that humans consume poisons for pleasure, engage in deliberate self-harm for entertainment, and celebrate violence as sport. Yeah. The Galactic Council classifies any species that regularly practices such behaviors as dangerously unstable and typically quarantines them until they evolve beyond such tendencies. Jake looked genuinely concerned for the first time. Oh, that's not good. How long does quarantine usually last? Typically 10 to 50,000 years, depending on the severity of the psychological aberrations. The classroom fell silent except for the sound of Jake's coffee thermos being set down very carefully. Professor, Jake said slowly, what if I told you that humans don't consider any of this abnormal? What if these behaviors are just part of how we live? Professor Zethrak's crystalline skin went completely dark. Then I would say that humans are the most dangerous species ever encountered, and that the Galactic Council needs to reconsider Earth's application for membership. Jake stood up, and every alien in the room tensed. Professor, with all due respect, I think there's been a misunderstanding. His voice carried a new edge that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. You keep talking about humans like we're some kind of aberration, like we're broken. The smile that crossed his face was nothing like the cheerful expressions he'd worn before. What if we're not broken? What if we're just better at surviving than anyone else in the galaxy? The silence stretched until Echo finally whispered, What do you mean? Jake's eyes swept the classroom, taking in every terrified alien face. How many of your species survived ice ages? Volcanic winters? Mass extinctions? No one answered. Humans survived all of that. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived world wars, natural disasters, and resource shortages that should have wiped us out completely. He began walking slowly around the classroom, and every student he passed seemed to shrink away. You want to know why humans eat poison? Because during famines, we had to learn to eat anything that wouldn't kill us immediately. You want to know why we celebrate violence? Because for most of our history, the ability to fight determined who lived and who died. Professor Zethrak found his voice. Human Jake, you're frightening the other students. Jake stopped walking and looked genuinely surprised. I'm not trying to frighten anyone. I'm just explaining that human behavior isn't aberrant. It's adaptive. He returned his seat and sat down casually. Every species in this room evolved on worlds that were fundamentally safe. Stable climates, abundant resources, predictable environments. His voice became conversational again, but somehow that made it more unsettling. Humans evolved on a death world, a planet that spent millions of years actively trying to kill us. Everything about human biology and psychology is the result of surviving in an environment that would kill most galactic species within hours. The crowd outside the classroom had grown silent, pressing closer to hear. So when you see a human consume toxins, endure pain, or risk injury, don't think of it as aberrant behavior. Think of it as a reminder that we come from a place where those abilities meant the difference between life and death. Jake smiled, and this time it was neither cheerful nor threatening. It was simply confident. The real question isn't whether humans are too dangerous for galactic society. The real question is whether galactic society is ready for what humans can offer. Professor Zethrak stared at him for a long moment. And what exactly do humans offer? Jake's grin widened. We're the species you call when everything else has failed. When your perfect, stable civilizations face their first real crisis, you'll want humans on your side. He stood up and began packing his materials. Because we're the species that looks at impossible odds, laughs, and says, "Hold my beer." As Jake walked toward the door, every alien in his path moved aside. "Same time tomorrow, Professor," he called back cheerfully. I was thinking of demonstrating human pain tolerance by showing how we remove our own splinters. The sound that emerged from a classroom was like the universe itself having an anxiety attack. Jake paused at the door and looked back at his classmates with what could almost be called fondness. "You know what, guys? I think this is going to be a great semester." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like the ceiling of a tomb. In the sudden silence, Professor Zethrak reached for his communication device with trembling hands. "Galactic Council?" he said into the receiver. "We need to talk."